Pursuit. Young to old, from that very first handhold, clutched like paper straws, grasping for more. To games or winning fame or toys or childhood ploys, to chase after the sunset, to pursue tomorrow's joys, to parties, grades, success and stability, for a career, for love, for an inner sense of serenity, reaching for the world to experience equality, security, whilst holding the hands of our very own insecurity and endless pursuit. Confusion of life's fusion of endless commotion and motion, emotion and motion and more. Pursuit of meaning when the world feels so dim. Pursuit of community when friendship wanes thin. Pursuit of perfect when the expectations never cease. Pursuit of justice for there to finally be peace. Pursuit of hope. Pursuit 2022, 7th to 11th of February. What are we searching for?
Working?
Yeah.
I don't think this. Oh, this is on. Okay. Welcome. Is this on? Yeah. Oh, sorry. We'll start again. Welcome to our second evening of Pursuit. We're so glad you can make it. If you're here for the first time, then we're so glad to see you. If you were here yesterday, then so glad to see you again. And if you're joining us on the live stream, you're so welcome too. I hope isolation isn't too boring. My name is In Yong. I am a second-year engineer at Clare.
And my name is Molly. I'm a second-year medic at Selwyn. So this week, the Cambridge Christian Union is having a series of events around the idea of pursuit. We'll be having various talks, performances, and interviews, exploring the stuff of life and what we spend our time searching for.
And just before we get started, if you're looking for some toilets, there are at the back, on the right-hand side. If you go through the doors, you'll be able to find it. And we also have a quiet space. That's if you want to spend some time on your own, thinking about what you've just heard, it's for you. Please do use it. It's just through the doors at the back, on the left-hand side. If you go up and follow the signs, you'll be able to find it easily. And if you do have any more questions, please ask those people at the back. They are all wearing a navy pursuit jumper, so they love to answer your questions.
So each of the days this week, we have a theme. Yesterday's theme was meaning, and if you went to one of those events, we really hope you enjoyed it. Today, we'll be looking at community, and tonight's talk is on how do I find belonging in an individualistic world. We'll be having a short interview with Krish Kandaya. Krish is a writer, a refugee advocate, and founder of the adoption charity Home for Good. And after that, we'll also be exploring community via a short talk and Q&A and some musical performance.
But before we get started, we thought that you really enjoyed the quiz yesterday. So we're going to now have another quiz. I don't know if it's going to be on the screens. There we go.
There we go.
Very random Cambridge quiz questions. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. If we move to the next slide. First question is, how long does it take to cycle from Girton to Homerton, according to Google Maps? A, is it 23 minutes? B, 33 minutes? Or C, 43 minutes? Okay, we'll reveal the answer. It is 23 minutes. It's quite short. Yeah.
Okay, next question. Which is bigger, the Corpus clock or the world's largest cheese? I got the answer. It's the cheese. It's 1.65 meters wide.
Massive. Who is richer, not older? Number one, is it Donald Trump? Or number two, is it Trinity and John's combined? Quite a hard one. We will have the answer. It's Donald Trump. Woo!
Which is longer, the distance from Market Square to Grantchester or the world's longest noodle? We got the answer? It's Market Square to Grantchester, but the noodle is pretty long, 3 kilometers.
That's very long. Which is greater? Number one, is it the number of students at Cambridge? Number two, is it the world record number of Big Macs consumed in a lifetime? Have a good guess. Pretty similar, right?
Yeah. It's really gross.
Okay, we'll have the answer. It's the Big Macs. It's 32,340. That is a lot. And, yeah.
Which of these is older? Is it Christ College Pool or Buckingham Palace? The answer is Christ Pool. Anyone from Christ? Good, quite lucky.
Woo,
yeah.
you got one there. Okay, last question. Last question? Yeah. Which is older? Is it number one, Emma, or number two, a flushing toilet? One with a valve. It's Emma. It's, 10 years of no flushing toilets.
Yeah, not good. So now we're going to be inviting up Michael, who's our speaker for this evening. Shall I go? Go for it.
Okay.
Yeah, so Michael, for those of us who weren't here yesterday, who are you and what are you doing here?
Great. So my name is... Should we sit down or should we stand up?
What do you
I feel
want
we
to
should
do?
sit down. I think we should sit
Okay.
down. My name is Michael, and I... what am I doing here?
Yeah.
Well, I'm speaking, actually, this week at all the evening events. So if you were here last night, you'd have seen that. And Niv is doing some of the lunchtime talks. And that's actually what I have the privilege of doing quite a lot of the year, actually, speaking at events like this, not just here in Cambridge, not just here in the UK, but in other parts of Europe and beyond. You may or may not know that the student group who organise this event are part of a whole family of similar groups of various sizes all over the world. And it's my joy to be able to work with groups like that.
So, Michael, you've been in Cambridge for a few days now, is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah. What has been your highlight so far?
Oh, highlight so far. Well, last night I got introduced after the event to the institution of Cambridge, which is Jack's Gelato. So, I have to say, it was up there. I think historic collegiate universities all need their gelato shop. So I was in St Andrews a while back, and they all took me to their gelato shop. I won't tell you which one was better, but I have to say it was up there.
And because tonight we're thinking about community, can I ask you, where are you from?
Yeah, so that's a good question. My family background is from Estonia, actually, which is where the name Ots comes from. But I was born and brought up in Leicester, so not too far from here. I loved it when Leicester City won the Premier League, because finally everyone everywhere in the world knew where Leicester was, or at least they'd heard of it. So that was really good. But actually, my wife and I live just outside Leicester, in a little village called Keam. Has anyone heard of it? No, because it is a tiny village. And the fascinating fact of Keam is that 1,000 years ago, the population of Keam was 120. And in 2022, the population of Keyham is 120. So nothing changes in Keyham. So it's a kind of sleepy little village just outside the happening city of Leicester.
Right, thanks so much. Now I know about Keum. Over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. Well, before we look later at a talk, it's wonderful tonight to have a special guest with us. We have Chris Kanaya. So, Chris, do come and join me, and you'll be given a microphone on the way up. Great. Can we put our hands together for Chris? Great. Hey, Chris. Great to have you with us.
Nice to be here.
Good. Is my microphone not working? Good. No, not good, but now I have a microphone that is working. Great. Chris, great to have you with us. Tell us a bit about what you do in your day job, because you've got a very interesting job. I follow you on Instagram, and you're here, there, and everywhere, knocking on the door at 10 Downing Street and various things. So what is it that you're actually doing
I was not ambushing the Prime Minister with a cake when I went to Downing Street. That was
right, okay. Just get that out there.
Okay.
No, not involved in any parties.
No parties, no
good.
beer,
Okay,
nothing.
Yeah.
So I work with the government, informing them on their adoption policy.
Mm-hmm.
So I help them think about how we can help children that can't live with their birth parents know the love of a forever family.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a third of my life. Another third is I work with them on the welcome of people from Hong Kong. You may not know this, but around 100,000 people have moved to the UK from Hong Kong, which is fantastic. It's the largest planned migration to the UK from outside of Europe in a generation. And the last time this number of people came was the Windrush generation. And if you know anything about that, you know that the nation and even the church did a really bad job of welcoming people. So I wanted to fix that and say, could we flip that narrative and make sure the church was at the front of the queue to welcome people from Hong Kong?
Brilliant. Did you say a third and a third?
Man, you got it.
Yeah. So I'm waiting for the other third.
The last third is...
You sleep.
They were pleased. The government was pleased that we were doing a good job welcoming Hong Kongers. And so I got a call in August saying we're planning to very, in a measured and slow way, evacuate people who have been helping our troops in Afghanistan. And we'll just do it over a number of months, and it will all be very smooth. Well, you know that wasn't what happened. Suddenly there were thousands of people arriving on, transport planes. And so amazingly, the church has been able to wrap around about 35 of the 80 hotels that Afghan refugees are in and provide them with all the basics they need to kind of begin to start life. Most Afghan families are about 8 people, so 2 adults and 6 children, and it's really hard to kind of go outside of the hotel if you haven't got a pushchair, a pram, clothes for your children. So the church has been doing fabulous work there. And what's nice for me is that most of the people that have arrived from Afghanistan are Muslim. Probably 99.9% are Muslim, but Christians have been able to show hospitality to people that are different to them because they're saying, well, you're our neighbours, you're our friends. We want to make sure that you feel welcome here.
Fantastic. That sounds like an incredible amount of stuff to pack into one life. And actually, adoption is not just something you talk about and advocate, it's something you've got personal experience of, haven't you? Tell us a bit about your family.
Yes, and I know you probably are not thinking about raising families yet, but I just want to lodge an idea in your head that right now there are thousands of children in the UK, and if you're from the US, 120,000 children in the US that are in need of adoption. At the moment, their plan is to be in foster care until they age out at 18. And I think a child needs the same sort of love and support that we had in our lives that enabled us to flourish. So I have 1 wife and 6 children. We had 3 birth kids, and my wife thought we still had capacity to care for some more children. I thought I'd contributed to kind of population growth. I was over my 2.2, so I was doing well. And then 2 things happened. One was some friends of mine in their 60s became foster carers, and I thought, if they could do that in their 60s, maybe I could do it in my 30s. And the second thing that happened is it's an occupational hazard if you become a Christian. God spoke to me in the Bible. I hadn't realised it. Somehow I'd been reading the Bible all my life, but I'd missed the bit where God had continually, almost every other page, talked about his concern for vulnerable children. And that really struck me, that God wanted children to know the love and support of a family, because that was our story, that if you become a Christian, you become an adopted child of God. And God didn't adopt us because he was bored or lonely or infertile. God didn't adopt us because he needed it. God adopted us because we needed it. And I thought, oh, you're right, I don't need another child in my life, but another child might need me in their lives as a father. So could I step up the way that God stepped up for me? So that was our journey into adoption.
Wow. And how's that worked out? I mean, like...
Most of the time it's awesome.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's pretty chaotic. Children that have had a really tough start in life, it isn't all Despicable Me. Is that a reference you guys would... Yeah? I know everyone's into Encanto at the moment. I just think it's just not Despicable Me. So in Despicable Me, these 3 perfect children get adopted by a supervillain. And his parenting techniques are pretty good, but all the problems of a child's trauma don't just go away if you sing a little song about cats. Children that have had trauma in their lives are probably going to need lifelong help and support. So it's not all as romantic as the movies, but it's incredibly fulfilling knowing that day by day you're making a difference in a child's life. Shall I tell you a quick story?
Yeah.
So we got this call one Friday night. It was about 4:45, and if you know anything about social work, that's a really dangerous time to answer the phone because in 15 minutes the office is going to close. And they phoned us up and they said, "Oh, Mr. Kandar, we know you've already got 6 children, but could you possibly take another one?" And I'm like, and my wife's like in the car already, engine revving, ready to go down to the local social services and pick the children up. And I said, just tell me something about the child. And the lady said, "I can't tell you much, but all I can tell you is he's a biter." And you went, "Oh no, like I wish you told me nothing now, like biter. What does he bite? Does he bite stuff?" I mean, I can cope with him biting stuff. Our furniture's already got some teeth marks on it from our cat and visitors and stuff. But if he bites people, well, that's a problem because where's he been? What's he been exposed to? He might be infectious. And that's when the bit of my brain that reads the Bible kicked in. And I thought to myself, biter, that is an inadequate description of a human person, isn't it? You and I, we're more than the worst thing we've ever done, or the worst thing that's ever been done to us. And I realised as God looked at this little boy that I'd never met, he didn't just see a biter, he saw someone of infinite value, dignity and worth. And if I was going to love God, then I needed to love this boy too, because God loved him. And if I could show that love just practically by being a good foster carer, then I was somehow in the inner circle of what God wanted to do in the world. So this little boy, he came into our life, he bit loads and loads of stuff, mostly sausages, which was totally fine by us. And one day, I'll just finish with this, I'd left my phone on the train, and someone handed it in at the next station and phoned me, or phoned my wife, and we worked out this little boy had never been on a train. He was 3, he'd never been on a train. So I took him to the train. He'd been with us for about 6 months by then, and he sat on the seat, and then he stood on the seat, which was really wrong, and then he pressed his nose against the window, and he shouted everything he could see. "Bus, tree, car, sheep, bridge, faster, faster, faster!" and this train was full of kind of business types going home after a long day in London, but they were all laughing. And I had this kind of God moment on the train. And I thought, when this little boy came to me, he couldn't speak. That's why he bit. Because he had speech delay. He couldn't kind of make himself known. And now I couldn't shut him up. He was just full of energy. And I thought, there's a bit in the Bible where it says God rejoices over us with singing, that as he looks at us, he knows our history, he knows the stuff that we've got ourselves messed up in. And he loves it when we begin to flourish and become the people that we were born to be. And I got a little taste of that on the 1648 from Hadnam and Tane Parkway to Bicester North. And that was a God moment for me as I was experiencing God's love for this little boy. And it was a game changer for us.
Amazing, fantastic. Now, you've already referenced the Bible. Obviously, you're a Christian, you have a Christian faith. But how did you come to become a Christian yourself?
Yeah, I'll try and be quick. It's complicated. My mum was from India. My dad was from Malaysia. My dad's dad was from Sri Lanka. And my mum's dad was Irish. So I'm really stuffed when it comes to the Olympics, all right when it comes to cricket. I'm pretty okay when it comes to football. But, confusing background. And my name is Krish, which is short for Krishna. And if you know your Hindu gods, he's quite a significant kind of guy. And for me, I wasn't inducted into a faith at birth. You know, my parents decided freedom of religion, we're not going to make you a Hindu. My mum had a kind of Catholic upbringing. We'll let you choose for yourself when you come of age. And I thought, well, okay, that's pretty cool. And a major factor in my life was when I was 15, I went to an all-boys comprehensive school, and it was the kind of place where kids used to suck the gas out of the gas taps in registration and try and light it on their breath. It was pretty rough school. And the teacher nipped out to have a quick smoke because it would be wrong to smoke in front of gas taps. But she left 30 teenage boys in charge of a chemistry lab. And one lad, while the teacher was out, he said, look, boys, something amazing happened to me last night. I became a friend of God. And it's the most amazing thing I've ever experienced. And I can't tell you a lot about it, but I want you to know about it. And for me, that was a game changer. There was someone who had a living relationship with God. He didn't just have religion. He wasn't just turning up at church. He wasn't just going through the motions. He really believed it and kind of put his life on the line in our chemistry lab in order to tell us about it. So for me, that was a trigger point for me to explore the Christian faith. And as I did that, for me particularly, it was Jesus, who he was. But it was the fact that I was absolutely convinced he was a historical figure. He lived, he died, and he rose again, not as a fable or a fairy tale, but as reality. And for me, that was the bit that made me think, I need to follow this guy. This is someone worth giving your life to.
Amazing. And that's not just a cerebral, it's not just a belief system. It's obviously made a huge difference in the choices you've made in life, in your family, in your career. But how has your faith in Jesus, you've hinted at it already, but how has that shaped the way you think about this whole question of community and belonging as we're thinking about tonight?
Yeah, well, I've just started something called the Hospitality Pledge. I've tried to trace through, even just Matthew's Gospel. I think you've got a Gospel in front of you, a life account of Jesus. And almost every page of it talks about Jesus's commitment to the kinds of people that the rest of society wants to forget. So, you know, from the very beginning, you get a little biography of Jesus or a genealogy of Jesus, and he's including in it people that weren't Jewish in his ancestral line, Gentiles. And back in those days, the Gentiles and the Jewish people didn't get on well. And Jesus wanted to say, no, I've got Gentile heritage because God's family's for everybody. Or the people that seem to flock to Jesus are the ones that everybody else doesn't want to spend time with. You know, it's people that had some form of leprosy. I don't know if we'd still use that name for it today, but it was some kind of contagious disease. Jesus touched them, even though everyone thought that would be a nightmare. Or tax collectors, people that had somehow done a deal with the Roman government and were creaming taxes off for themselves. They were social pariah. People who were involved in prostitution. All sorts of the wrong kinds of people, according to that society, Jesus was reaching out to. And so everything about Jesus is modelling to us what the life of faith is about. And you can sum it up with two commandments, that we're supposed to love God and we're supposed to love our neighbour. And if you don't love your neighbour, then you don't love God. It's a package deal. And sometimes, to be honest, Christians forget that. We just think it's about loving God, like close your eyes and pretend the world isn't there. But if you look at the life of Jesus, it's always about showing love to your neighbour. And your neighbour could be anybody. It could be someone from the wrong culture, someone who's got the wrong history according to the times, someone who's doing the wrong stuff. That is no barrier for the love of God to break through. That's why Christians can show love to Afghan refugees or people from Hong Kong or people that are coming out of prison or people that are rich or people that are poor. There's something incredibly transformative about who Jesus is. And that's the life of the Christian. We're trying to walk in the footsteps of Jesus and allow his passions to become ours. Love God, love your neighbour, whoever they are.
That's amazing. Fantastic. Now, if people are here and they want to know a bit more about what you do, I follow you on Instagram, so I guess they can do that, can't they?
Do that.
But tell me more about Home for Good, the organisation that you set up.
Yes, I founded a charity 8 years ago. I don't work for it anymore because I try to have clean hands when I work with the government, so I don't prefer one charity over the others. But Home for Good had a very simple idea. When we added up the kind of number of kids that were in the care system that needed fostering, all the kids that needed adoption, we worked out that if every church in the country could find one new foster carer or adoptive family and the rest of the church wrap around them like an extended family, aunties and uncles, we could meet the entire need in the care system. And that's really achievable. I'm not asking everybody to adopt 100 children each, just one new family per church to foster or adopt, and us to play our role, and we've got it. But the thing I want to just leave with you as a challenge is when you picture your future family, whether it's a husband and a wife, or 2.2 children, or a dog, or a leafy suburb somewhere, if you're a follower of God, what would it look like to show God's love to a child that otherwise wouldn't know the love of a family? What could that look like? And it could be a mix. It could be have some birth kids and then add to them through fostering or adoption. Or I've met people who have decided, you know what, why would I bring new children into the world when there are already children that need my love and support? So I've met people that have used adoption as plan A, and that's been a game changer for their lives.
Amazing. You get the train in 21 minutes.
Yes, thank you.
So you're going to be around for about 5 minutes
I am.
before you beat a hasty exit to the train station. But we're going to take a 5-minute break. If you do want to catch Krish, catch him quickly. Before we then continue to think about this whole question of community and belonging through the talk and then through performances later on. So do stick around, grab another drink if you want, grab Krish if you want, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Thanks so much, Krish.
Great. If we could all take a seat, if you're still standing. Okay, so I'm just going to hand over to Michael, who's going to give us a talk for the next 20 minutes or so.
I got this. Great, thank you so much. Well, it is great having you with us this evening. Hope you've had another donuts. It's probably not the time to tell you how many calories in a Krispy Kreme, but let's just say that you're well over your daily allowance if you've had two. Sorry, I didn't make you feel any better at all, did it? Let's forget about that. As we go through tonight, just to say as well, there's a pigeonhole code on the screen. You'll see there. The passcode tonight is belong. And so if at any point through the next 20 minutes or so you have questions off the back of what you hear, then please do go onto Pigeonhole and be putting your questions in. We'll look at those a little bit later on. But tonight we're looking at this question: how can I find belonging in an individualistic world? A few years ago, people were warning of a coming pandemic. It wasn't a warning of the COVID pandemic. No one seemed to see that one coming. But it was a warning of a different kind of pandemic, a pandemic of loneliness, a pandemic of isolation. And particularly in the West, particularly here in the UK, in fact, people saw that people's experience of loneliness and isolation was on the increase. The UK got dubbed as the loneliness capital of Europe. They appointed what became known as the loneliness minister to deal with the problem. And of course, the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, has only made things worse. And very interestingly, according to surveys done over the last year or so, out of all the lonely people in Britain today, the loneliest demographic is yours, if you're aged 16 to 24. And of all the ways that the pandemic has affected us in terms of increasing our loneliness, it's affected you the most. Experiences of loneliness in your age category have tripled in the last 2 years. So if you are struggling with that question tonight, you are most probably not alone. And just because you're in a busy room of people who look like they've got it all together, that is not the case, is it? Sometimes the loneliest experiences of our lives are where we are in the middle of a crowd, where we feel we should fit in, but somehow we don't feel we do. And of course, loneliness is bad for us, not just emotionally, but also physically. I was struck by this. Do you know what the number one indicator is to determine how long you probably will live? It's not how much sport you play. It's not how few Krispy Kreme donuts you eat, thank goodness. It's not how many cigarettes you may or may not smoke or how much you may or may not drink. The number one indicator in terms of your expected lifespan is actually your social interactions. It's not just bad for us emotionally, it's bad for us physically. And yet there's an irony, isn't there? Because our generation has never been more connected. Think about it. We are so connected when it comes to our social media. I mean, I just checked my Facebook this afternoon. 3.9K friends. Don't ask me to name them all or to tell you. My wife did that the other day. She said, okay, let's see if you can actually tell us who any of these friends are. And she started picking them at random. And I realized, oh dear, yeah. But we're connected, aren't we? We can, at the pull of a phone from our pockets, be speaking to anyone, anywhere, about anything. Never more connected, yet never more alone. I was reading this book just a couple of weeks ago by the Irish novelist Sally Rooney, Beautiful World, Where Are You? And it focuses on two friends and their communications, actually by email to each other, about their struggles with life and loneliness and their longings for love. And one of the characters, Alice, writes to her friend Eileen, and she says this: in public, I'm always talking about care and ethics and the value of human community. But in my real life, I don't take on the work of caring for anyone except myself. Who in the world relies upon me for anything? No one. I can blame myself, and I do, but I also think the failure is general. People our age used to get married and have children and conduct love affairs, and now everyone is still single at 30 and lives with housemates they never see. Traditional marriage was obviously not fit for purpose and almost ubiquitously ended in one kind of failure or another, but at least it was an effort at something. and not just a sad, sterile foreclosure on the possibility of life. Of course, if we all stay alone and practice celibacy and carefully police our personal boundaries, many problems will be avoided, but it seems we will also have almost nothing left that makes life worthwhile. I guess you could say the old ways of being together were wrong. They were. And we didn't want to repeat old mistakes. We didn't. But when we tore down what confined us, what did we have in mind to replace it? I offer no defense of coercive heterosexual monogamy, except that it was at least a way of doing things, a way of seeing life through. What have we got now instead? Nothing. And we hate people for making mistakes so much more than we love them for doing good. That the easiest way to live is to do nothing, to say nothing, and love no one. That's a profound insight into maybe our experiences of life, the struggles, the isolation, the loneliness. But where do we go with that? Why are we so lonely? And what is the answer to it? Another fascinating book is by Faye Bound-Alberti, and it's called A Biography of Loneliness. And in this book, she's looking at the history of this concept of loneliness. What's really fascinating is she says, contrary to what we might think, loneliness, as we talk about it today, is not a universal, age-old problem. In fact, in the English language, she says, the word loneliness didn't really exist before 1800. Now, of course, it wasn't that people were never on their own. It's just that they had a different word to talk about their experience. Loneliness, with its negative connotations, is a relatively recent phenomenon, and it's found particularly in the West. And her question in the book is why? Why do we seem to have increasingly found ourselves in this experience of loneliness? She offers two possible suggestions. One is tied in with the idea of Darwinian evolution and the way that we perceive people differently as a result. But the other, she says, is the decline in institutionalized religion. She says in the past, people, when they were alone, saw that being alone could have positive benefits. They didn't use the word lonely, they often used the word solitude. Being apart from others meant being able to focus on your communion, your fellowship, your friendship with God. But also, the institution of religion also brought people into community with each other. And she says we've moved on from that. We've rejected the old way of doing things. And perhaps one of the consequences of that is the experiences of loneliness that we have today. Now, what do we make of that? The problem for most of us is we think, okay, well, we can see maybe how religion and the idea of God gave people a sense of belonging and community, but we don't want to go back to that because that's make-believe, isn't it? That's just a psychological crutch. That's just the stuff people believe in to make life better. And hey, life might be tough, but better to believe the truth and get on with it than to believe in lies. Isn't believing in God a bit like, believing in, imaginary friends, the kind of thing that you should grow out of at any decent age? But what if it's not? What if there were good reasons to think that actually that God could be the source of community and belonging? That's what I want us to think about just for a few minutes tonight. And on your tables, there should be a little piece of paper with a segment from one of the biographies of Jesus' life written on it. So if you could just pick that up, because I'm going to read that to us and look at it together. This comes not from Mark's account of Jesus' life. Those are the books that are on your tables, and they're free for you to take away. But this is from the last of the 4 accounts of Jesus' life contained in the New Testament, a biography of Jesus' life by a guy called John. And when John tells us the story of Jesus, he doesn't just go back to Bethlehem and the Christmas story. He goes back to the very beginning of everything and puts the story of Jesus in the context of the cosmos. And he starts his biography this way. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning, and through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made, and in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world didn't recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet, to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we've seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. So John starts this account by talking about this strange concept called the Word. And he tells us about this Word as being the source of life and light and everything. This Word creates everything we know. He is the source of it all. And as we see, this Word was God, and this Word was with God. Now, it's very easy, isn't it, for us to say, well, I'm going to dismiss that right out of hand, because ever since the theory of evolution, we know that we don't need God to account for our origin stories. We've got other ways of accounting for our existence, not fables like this. So worth just throwing one out for a minute, though, and just saying, when we think about origins, there are 5 big questions we could ask, aren't there, about our origins. You could say, firstly, why is there anything and not nothing? Secondly, why is there order and not just chaos? Thirdly, why is there life and not just non-life? Fourthly, why is there complex life and not just single-celled amoebas floating around in some primordial soup? And fifthly, why is, in one instance, that complex life become conscious? Why is it sitting here on a Tuesday night eating Krispy Kremes and asking these big questions? Those are 5 big questions we might ask about origins. Why is there anything, not nothing? Why is there order, not chaos? Why is there life, not just stuff? Why is there complex life, not just simple life? Why is there conscious life? Now, the theory of evolution would explain one of those 5, wouldn't it? Why life is complex, not just simple. But it doesn't answer all the questions by any stretch, does it? And actually, it's a common assumption to think that science has answered all the questions about the universe, so we no longer need to think about questions about God. Whereas actually, some of these questions are questions that have been brought about by science and our increase in our knowledge. So it's too simple to say, well, we've got it all sorted. But also, just worth bearing in mind, it's very popular for sometimes people to say, well, the universe just came into existence out of nothing. I find that kind of amusing because sometimes people mock Christians for believing in things like the virgin birth, you know, the idea that Jesus came into existence without the biological process that normally brings about birth. But as a friend of mine said, you know, you've either got a choice. You believe in the virgin birth of Jesus or you believe in the virgin birth of the universe, a universe that came about by nothing. But you pick the miracle. But what John says is there's this Word. The Word was God. The Word was with God. He creates everything that there is. But then, this is the really incredible thing. Just look down at the last paragraph, verse 14. It says this, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. This Word who creates the universe, John says, stepped into the universe that he created and lived among us. See, lots of people, when they think about the existence of God, sometimes like to discuss philosophically the kind of questions we just thought about. But John says the biggest signpost and reason for believing that this God, this Word exists, is not just the existence of the universe, but that one day this Word became part of that universe in the person of Jesus. And John, in the rest of his book, goes on to unpack what this man grew up to live and do. Incredible claim. And by the way, I often find it interesting that those who sometimes have written the biggest books trying to debunk the existence of God often spend very little time, if any, asking the question, who was Jesus? When certainly as a Christian, the biggest reason for me to believe that there is a God out there is Jesus, the Word who became flesh. And if you want to find out more about that, why not read through one of those accounts, the Mark's account on your table? It'd be a great place to start. And you'll see the kind of things that Jesus says. He kind of says things that only God could say. He says things like, if you've seen me, you've seen God. He claims to be able to forgive people's sins, something that only God could do. He claims to be the fulfillment of history. He tells other people not to judge, but he himself says that he is going to be the judge of history. Profoundly arrogant things to say if he's just making them up. But then he also backs up these claims by the things that he does. He shows his authority over nature, over sickness, over evil, over death itself, showing that he can make those kind of claims and that we should believe him. Now, you might have questions about that, and you can put them in the pigeonhole, and we'll come back to them later. But maybe you're thinking, but why? Like, if God's purpose was simply to prove to us that he exists, there'd be a lot simpler ways to do it, wouldn't there? Have you ever thought? I mean, like these days, you could just, I don't know, set up a global Zoom meeting. Send us all a Zoom code, tell us tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, be there. You know, there are really easy ways. I mean, this is pretty complex. Getting yourself born into a slightly unstable context in the Middle East 2,000 years ago, living as a carpenter's son, getting yourself crucified at the hands of your enemies. I mean, if you're just trying to prove to the world that you exist, that's a pretty complex and involved way of doing it. And actually, that's because God's purpose in coming as Jesus was not simply to prove that he exists, but to do something more. Look again at verse 14. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. He became physical and lived among us. I don't know about you, but one of the things through the pandemic that was just so tough, wasn't it, is that you could see people. They were there on a screen. And you could talk to them, but they weren't there. And maybe for the first time in our lives, we realize the value of physical connection, of being in the same place, of being able to touch, to hug, to eat around the same table. Things that we have taken for granted, suddenly we appreciate it because we hadn't had them. We were made for that kind of physical, close connection. And yet, this is the incredible claim of the Christian faith, that God became physical to connect with us. One of the names that was given to Jesus, we read about it at Christmas, is that he was Emmanuel, God with us. God came to be with us physically in history, and the Bible says now by his Spirit today we can experience that connection, that belonging with him. He came so we can be connected. But then John, as he writes this account of Jesus' life, says there's two ways we can respond to that kind of claim. It's just up there in the second paragraph. Look at verses 11 and 12. It says this: he came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. John says there's two ways we can respond. Firstly, we can reject. We can say, I'm going to reject this. Now, I meet people who say to me, well, I reject the Christian faith because there's just not enough evidence. I just can't believe it. What I find fascinating, though, when I read through the accounts of the life of Jesus, is that there are people 2,000 years ago who, in one sense, have far more than we do. They literally met the physical Jesus. They saw the things that he did. They heard his teaching with their own ears, and yet they still rejected him. Which kind of makes me think, is the problem at our heart a lack of evidence, or is it something else? And actually, one of the things the Bible says is that actually implicitly or explicitly, one of the things that we've all done by nature is we've all rejected God. We may not do it publicly and declare ourselves atheistic, but we might just subtly get on with life with no thought of him. But then have you thought about it? If God is this word, the source of life and light and everything, and we try to live our lives disconnected from him, it's going to have consequences, isn't it? It's a bit like, my phone. Every morning I unplug it from the wall. And as I unplug it, the battery immediately starts to drain. And if it's anything like your phone, it's probably by about 10 o'clock needing recharging again because it's disconnected from the source. And the Bible says we're disconnected from the source of life and love. We turn our back on this God. And there's consequences, not just because we don't experience God and his love, but actually there's consequences for our experience with each other as well. But wonderfully, John says that doesn't have to be the end of the story. He says again, look down again, verse 12. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or husband's will, but born of God. It's lovely hearing Chris talk about adoption tonight. And I don't know if you've been part of a family that's adopted, or you've got friends who've adopted, but there is a beautiful moment, isn't there, when someone becomes adopted into a family. Because when someone becomes adopted into a family, two things happen. Number one, they get parents that they haven't had before. Parents who hopefully are going to love them and include them and welcome them. But also, if those parents have already got, as in the case of Chris and his wife, other children, they suddenly have siblings who hopefully are also going to love them and welcome them, although that's sometimes more up for debate, isn't it? New parents, new family. And what John says is, what God wants to offer to us is that in Jesus. When someone comes to Jesus, we can get new parents, as it were, not physical, biological parents, of course. But God as a father. Now, I don't know about you, maybe your experience of a father hasn't been all that it should have been. But when the Bible talks about God as a father, it's talking about God as a father in the sense of all that a father should be and more. That we can experience the welcome, the love, and the acceptance of God as a father. And incredibly, the Bible says we can experience that because of Jesus. Because Jesus, God's Son, was willing to lose that acceptance and that welcome, was willing to face abandonment, ultimately on a cross as he would die, taking upon himself the guilt of our wrong so that we could be welcomed, so that we could know God as our Father. But also, this is the great thing. When someone comes to Jesus, they don't just know God as their Father, coming into that family, but they also become part of a family. And Chris alluded to that earlier as well, didn't he? That actually the church, at its best, is meant to be a family. So often we thought at lunchtime, didn't we, our experiences or thoughts of the church can be of an abusive institution or a rather outdated building or something that we wouldn't want to be part of. But actually when Jesus talks about the church, he's talking about a family, and a family that we're welcomed into, that we can be a part of. And I have to say, actually, that is such a beautiful thing. I've had the privilege of being able to travel, not just around the UK, as I say, but in other parts of the world. And to know that all over the world, I am part of a family that are united and brought together because of Jesus. And actually, tonight, this event organized by the Christian Union, it's not been organized by any one church, but actually by lots of churches. But hopefully, one of the things that the Christian Union want to do is to say, hey, this is something of what family can be like, and you can be part of it. So I guess my question as we finish is this. Have you ever experienced that? Have you ever experienced what it is to be part of that family and to know God not as some distant reality, but as your Father and as a friend? And that is a beautiful thing. Or maybe you're saying, well, I'm still not interested. I don't think this is true. I still think it's a psychological crutch. Well, if that's you, thank you so much for coming. It's great that you've stayed around. And thank you for listening to the talk as well. Maybe you felt it was awkward to get out halfway through. But whatever reason you stayed, or maybe you're in the hope there's more Krispy Kremes about to be served. But whatever your reason, can I just say, before you reject this, as I said earlier, make sure you know what it is that you're rejecting. On your tables, those uncovered books, they're a great place to start, to check out the life of Jesus, to check out the evidence for this claim, that this God is not some imaginary friend that we have invented to make life more tolerable, but he is the source of everything, and that being connected to him is the doorway into life as it was meant to be lived. At least check it out. Maybe you're here tonight and you're saying, well, I've got questions. What does this look like? How do I become part of this family? What would that mean for my life? And the great thing is all this week we're going to be looking at this from different angles, asking different questions. So keep coming through this week. It's going to be really helpful for you to unpack and explore this further. But maybe you're saying tonight, actually, I think this could be true. I'd love to know the welcome of God, to know his friendship through life. It makes the bad times more bearable. It makes the good times even more wonderful as we share it with a God who is with us and loves us. And a welcome into a community of his people, a family. And the great thing is you can. And it says that it's open to anyone who receives him. So maybe you want to say to this God tonight, thank you for the welcome that you offer me. I want to experience that welcome. Please welcome me into your family. Please forgive me for the stuff in my life that's wrong. Please help me to get to know you for myself. That'd be a great way to start, wouldn't it? Listen, we're going to take a 5-minute break. And in that 5-minute break, you can do a few things. You can go to Pigeonhole and you can write your questions. You can completely disagree with everything I've just said. That's fine. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Be honest. If you can't think of any questions, just go on there anyway, because it's always interesting to see what other people have asked. You can vote them up if you think they're good. You can't vote them down if they're bad, but you can think of others that might be better. So go to the questions. The other thing you can do is it'd be great just to pick up the feedback form that's on your little tables, or your big tables if you're sitting around the side. On that, there's a space where you can leave some comments. So can you just pick that up now and pass them round? That'd be a really helpful thing. You should be able to find it. It's kind of business card sized. Pick that up, pass that round. And then there's pens provided as well. Just leave some comments. We'd love to know what you're thinking about these events. Be completely honest. You can say, I prefer the lunchtime speaker. I won't be offended. Whatever you want. But also, if you'd like to find out more, if you'd like to get connected, if you've got questions, we'd love to be in touch with you. So leave your details there as well. Tick whichever box is appropriate. And what will happen is some lovely member of the Kit Queue will basically give you a call tomorrow and offer to meet up for a coffee and a cake. They'll buy it, I assure you, and you just bring your questions. So leave your details. They'd love to be in touch in that way. And the third thing you can do is you can chat. So why don't we turn around our tables now, chat about what we've heard from Krish, from this passage in John's Gospel, think about the questions you might want. We'll be back in about 5 minutes for those questions. We'll have 10 minutes for those questions, and then we've got some performances at the end to enjoy and look forward to. Thank you.
me uncover. Okay. Michael, there are really good questions here. We'll try to get through as many questions as we can. We won't necessarily do them in order, but we'll try to get through the popular ones first. So first question says, other religions seem to provide community as well. What's so different about Christian community?
Yeah, great question. So you say, well, like Christianity isn't the only religion that offers community, and that's true. I grew up in Leicester, as I said earlier, and Leicester had, people say, I'm not sure whether it's actually true, but it nearly became true if it's not actually true. Leicester was the first city in Britain to have an ethnic majority, so incredibly culturally diverse. And one of the things that was really beautiful about that, actually, was the sense of diversity that brought to my upbringing. And of course, you saw the way that community is really valuable in different cultures and in different religions. And sometimes, I'd say, Western culture is put to shame by that real sense of belonging and community. And as a Christian, I'm not surprised by that, because if the Christian story is true, and that God, a communal, relational God, created us as human beings in his image to be communal and relational, then that is how we function by default. That's what we are wired for. So whether or not we believe the Christian story, whether or not we believe God, it doesn't stop us being created that way, and we will look for that. So there's lots of beautiful aspects of community that we see in different cultures and different religious systems. One of the things I find particularly beautiful about the Christian community, of which there are many, is that the Christian community, some people call it a community of grace. But what they mean by that is that our access to God and into his family is not based on what we have done, but it's based on what Jesus has done for us. So it's not because I have observed particular religious rituals, that I have been particularly diligent in my church attendance or anything like that. It's based purely on what Jesus has done for me in his life and death and resurrection. So therefore, my standing is based on that, not on me, which is wonderfully democratic, you might say, because in the church community, we all have the same standing before God. No one is more important than anyone else, or at least it shouldn't be that way in a church fully living out the beliefs that they follow. And that's a beautiful thing, because it means the person who came to know Jesus yesterday is as much a part of that family and that community as the person who's been a Christian for years. It's based on that community of grace. So it should mean that there isn't any place for pride, because actually the first step to becoming a Christian is not thinking, oh, I'm really good, I'm included now. It's recognizing I'm no good at all. I need God's forgiveness. And wonderfully, I find his forgiveness and his welcome, and also the welcome of others around me. And that's something I found really beautiful in the church.
Next question says, what should we think when some people are not treated as part of a church family? And can we really follow Jesus' word if they are made to feel unwelcome because they are, for example, LGBT?
Okay, so what if people are made to feel like they're not welcome as part of God's family, and I guess particularly referencing people in the LGBT community? What I'd say there is when Jesus says, love your neighbor, he didn't kind of preface that by saying, love your straight neighbor, or love your, happily married with 2.2 children neighbor, or love your, or whatever. Like, he just said, love your neighbor, whoever they are. And the Bible says God loves the world. So if Christians have been homophobic, if they've demonstrated that in the way they've lived, then actually that would be out of step with Jesus and what Jesus says. Now, that's not to say that Jesus doesn't have things to say about sexuality and the way that God designed sexuality. And by the way, that's a massive challenge to everyone, whether you're straight or gay, married or single. It's very challenging when you start to think about what Jesus says about sexuality. But Jesus says his offer of welcome is for everyone. And actually, we're to demonstrate that. And I was at a Christian event, a bit like this, organized by another CU group in a different part of the country just a couple of years ago before the pandemic. I was chatting to a lovely girl there from the LGBT Society, and she was just saying to me, she said, when I came to this university, she said, I was really fearful of meeting Christians because everything I'd heard about the Christian faith made me think that they hate me. She says, I was so fearful, actually, that I was going to say, like, make sure I don't live anywhere near a Christian because I wouldn't feel safe. She said that I didn't, and then, lo and behold, my next-door neighbor is, like, the president of the Christian Union. But she says, actually, my preconceptions of what she was going to be like were totally blown out of the water. And she says, look, I still don't agree with everything that Christianity teaches, but I've experienced welcome and love, and I love coming. And I really hope that the KICU will be a place like that, and a place where you can feel that welcome. Yeah.
And next question. One of the reasons why our society is so individualistic and thus people are so lonely is that our economy and education system is structured around competition and productivity. How can the church resolve this?
Yeah. Interesting, actually, I talked about Faye Bound-Alberti's book, and she talks about those two reasons why we might feel increasingly a sense of loneliness. And she talks about the decline of institutionalized religion being one of them, but the other was the way that we now view people differently, and we view people particularly as competition rather than community. And she says there's a sense in which, for me to succeed, you have to fail, and I have to get ahead of you. And so we can be in this very, very competitive society. And I wonder whether part of that is because we also derive value and significance on how successful we are. And it's very easy to do, isn't it? We rate someone by which university they got into. So you're feeling pretty good right now. But then by what job they get. Maybe you're a bit more worried about that. By how much they get paid and all those kind of things. And actually, one of the things we're going to be looking at on Thursday is one of the radical things about the Christian faith. It says our value is not in what we do, but in who we are. We're not human doings, but human beings. And that value, according to the Christian story, is because we are created in the image of God. And that gives us incredible value and significance. And that means that we should treat others with that same dignity and value, whoever they are, however important or not they might seem by the different pecking orders. This is a person whom God has created. And that was beautiful, wasn't it, how Chris talked about that, and the way that should change the way we think about those who society might exclude or reject. It should radically change our view of others if that's our belief.
I think we have time for two more.
Okay.
What if I don't feel lonely? Do I need Christianity?
That's a great question. Firstly, I'm really glad that you don't. Like, that's good. Maybe you're here tonight and you're thinking like, oh, I always talk about loneliness. I'm loving Cambridge. Never been happier. Well, fantastic. I'm really, really glad that you've experienced that. I'm not saying that, Christianity is just for people who are at their wits' end and for whom life is falling apart. Although, having said that, of course, the beautiful thing is, if you are in that place, there is welcome and community. But maybe what I want to say is this. What if there was a whole level of welcome, community, and belonging that you've not even tapped into yet? What if the wonderful sense of community and friendship and belonging that you've started to experience in life so far are actually signposts and pointers towards an even greater sense of belonging and welcome that you could receive and be part of? And actually the Bible says that is the case. That, think about it this way. The Bible says the picture of becoming a follower of Jesus is becoming part of a family. Now, if your experience of family was awful, then that's wonderful, isn't it? Because you say, my biological family was awful, but in God I have a father who loves me and a family in the church who welcome me. But think about it. If your experience of a family was great, if family is the metaphor, the picture that God uses to point towards what he is like towards us, how great must that be? And what if you didn't experience that? What if there was even more to be had?
Thank you. And our last question. Is loneliness and the desire to be part of a community a good enough reason to join the church? Or should there be more than that?
Yeah, good question. So is loneliness a good enough reason? A bit similar to the last one, isn't it? And I guess by extrapolating from that, you might say, and if I don't feel lonely, do I need to? I think there are lots of reasons why it's good to become a follower of Jesus. And in my experience, I've seen people come to discover the Christian faith and embrace a life following Jesus. I've seen often it can happen for one of three reasons. Sometimes it's a sense of loneliness. I long for belonging, and I find suddenly here is a community that welcomes me, a God who loves me, and I get brought into a family, and that is a beautiful thing. For some people, it's a great sense of need in life, and we're talking about some of the great existential needs in life this week and how the Christian faith can meet some of those other needs in real ways and make sense of those desires and questions that we have. But also for some people, it's more cerebral. It's just actually, I don't feel I particularly need this, but I come to a conviction that I think it might be true. If you want a good example of that, look at someone like C.S. Lewis. Who, for many of his years in life, he was a skeptic, till eventually later in life became a committed follower of Jesus. And he didn't want Christianity to be true. It wasn't so much a psychological crutch for Lewis. He actually didn't want it to be true. But actually, eventually he came to this conviction, partly through his friendship with Tolkien. They were good friends and talked much together in Oxford. He came to this conviction it was true. And there's this lovely line in his kind of semi-biographical work called Surprised by Joy, where he says, I knelt by my bed, the most dejected and reluctant convert in all of England. He didn't want it to be true. But the book is called Surprised by Joy. And there's a double play on the word joy there, because his wife, who he also met later in life, was called Joy, and he was surprised by her. But also, he was surprised when he embraced the Christian faith of the joy that he experienced. He didn't go into the Christian faith looking for community or a satisfaction for his longings. He embraced it because he felt that he couldn't avoid it any longer. It was true. It stacked up. Jesus lived, he died, he rose again. This was real. It wasn't just a myth. It was the true myth, as Lewis coined the phrase. But on embracing it, what a surprise. I discovered joy, I found love, but I didn't expect to find. He thought it was going to be the end of life. He found, actually, counterintuitively, it was the beginning of life. So maybe you're here tonight and you're saying, actually, I long for community and belonging. And if that's you, I want to say the wonderful thing is in Jesus you find the greatest belonging and community that you'll ever experience. But if you're here tonight saying, I'm not interested in that at all, I just came because my mate dragged me along and I couldn't say no anymore. I've been saying no all year. I just want to know whether it's true. Well, fine. Check out whether it's true. Read the uncover books and find out. But look, if it is true, if this claim that we've made tonight, that the author of life itself stepped into human history, lived and died and rose again, if that actually happens, and there are good reasons to check it out, and if you're not convinced by the books themselves, there's a great book on the bookstall at the back called Can We Trust the Gospels, which looks at some of the historical reasons why we can trust that as a reliable source. And then say, if this is true, what difference would this make for my life? So for whatever reason you've come, do check it out and look into it more. Can I just say one more thing before I hand back to you? If you are wanting to say, how do I get started and experience this welcome, this community, this belonging that Jesus offers, I've got a little booklet. It's just called Yes, written by a friend of mine, and it just explains how you might begin to experience that and take first steps towards that. I've got some. They're not on the bookstall. They'll be in my hand. But if you'd like one, just come and grab one off me and I'll give one to you. And you might find that really helpful just to read tonight as you go home. It'll take me about 10 minutes, so you're clever. You'll probably do it in 5. But anyway, doesn't matter. However long it takes, it'll just help you with what it means to start out with Jesus. So come and grab one off me at the end. I'd love to give one. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So thanks so much for joining us this evening. We hope you enjoyed it.
And like Michael said, scattered around on the tables are some orange feedback forms. If you haven't already, we would love it if you wanted to fill one of those out and help us know how we can make the events for the rest of the week even better. And also at the back there is a bookstall. All the books are free. We would love it if you wanted to take one of those. And if you're joining us on the live stream, you can find a link to the bookstall and an online feedback form in the YouTube description.
And Michael talked about Jesus today, and if you would like to read a historical account of Jesus' life, then on your tables are these books called Uncover, and these are basically short witnesses of Jesus that's written by a guy called Mark, and there's some questions in the book which would help you to read and think about as you read them.
And we've got loads more events on this week. We'll be looking at themes like justice, hope, and perfect. Tomorrow we'll be back in HT, which is down that way. There'll be a lunchtime talk from 1 till 2, the lunch is free, and an evening talk from 7 till 9 with Michael again. And both of those talks tomorrow will be looking at this idea of a perfect life and whether we can find meaning in that.
Before we officially end the evening, Sarah and Jake will be performing for us. So after they have performed, please feel free to stick around and continue chatting. Michael will also be here. If you do have any questions, he'd love to answer them. Yeah.
And if you're joining us on the live stream, there'll be a Zoom after the performance. You can find the link to that in the Facebook event description. We'd love it if you wanted to join, if you've got any questions about what you heard tonight, or if you just want some social interaction.
Again, thanks so much for coming. We'll hand over to Jake and Sarah.
Hi, as In Young said, I'm Sarah, this is Jake. We're going to be performing a song called Out of Hiding by Stephanie Gretzinger. It's written from the perspective of Jesus talking to us, inviting us to come to know him without any barriers. And he's welcoming each of us in this song to find true belonging and a home through being in a relationship with him. So we hope you enjoy. Come out of hiding, you're safe here with me. There's no need to cover what I already see. You've got your reasons, but I hold your peace. You've been on lockdown and I hold the key. 'Cause I loved you before you knew it was love, and I saw it all. Still I chose the cross, and you were the one that I was thinking of when I rose from the grave. Now rid of the shackles, my victory's yours, and I tore the veil for you to come close. There's no reason to stand at a distance anymore. You're not far from home. I'll be your lighthouse when you're lost at sea, and I will illuminate everything. No need to be frightened of intimacy. Just throw off your fears and come running to me. 'Cause I loved you before you knew it was love, and I saw it all. Still I chose the cross, and you were the one that I was thinking of when I rose from the grave. Now rid of the shackles, my victory's yours, and I tore the veil for you to come close. There's no reason to stand at a distance anymore. You're not far from home. And oh, as you run, what hindered love would only become part of the story. And oh, as you run, what hindered love will only become part of the story. And oh, as you run, what hindered love will only become part of the story. And oh, as you run, what hindered love will only become part of the story. 'Cause I loved you before you knew it was love, and I saw it all. Still I chose the cross, but you were the one that I was thinking of when I rose from the grave. And now rid of the shackles, my victory's yours, and I tore the veil for you to come close. There's no reason to stand at a distance anymore. You're already home. There's no reason to stand at a distance anymore. You're not far from home. Thank you.